Welcome back to Linas Romantasy Collection, your sanctuary for the steamiest and most thrilling werewolf romances on YouTube. Today, we have a story that is going to make you laugh and swoon. It's called The Deadbeat and the Debt. Get ready to meet Zola, a tiny, fierce accountant who thinks she's just babysitting a grumpy patient until she accidentally tames a feral alpha king by patting him on the head. If you love the size difference trope and a possessive alpha who purrs, you are in for a treat. Before we unlock the penthouse doors, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button to help the channel grow, and share this video with a friend who loves a good romance. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new upload. And I want to know where my wolf pack is listening from today. Drop a comment below and tell me what city or country you are tuning in from. Now, let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Deadbeat and the Debt. The coffee can was empty. It wasn't a fancy safe. It was just a dented red Maxwell House tin hidden behind the bags of dry pasta in the pantry. But to Zola Vance, that tin was everything. It was the escape fund. It was 6 months of double shifts, skipped lunches, and walking to work in the rain to save bus fare. It was exactly $4,320, and now it was just a tin smelling faintly of old Arabica and betrayal. "Jax," Zola said. Her voice didn't scream, it was dangerously quiet. Jax was sitting on their sagging beige couch, staring intently at the TV where a horse race was finishing. He was a small man, not just in height, but in spirit. He had the nervous energy of a squirrel and the moral backbone of a chocolate eclair. He didn't look at her. "Babe, listen," Jack said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I got a tip, a guaranteed tip. Thunderbolt in the 5th. The odds were 10 to 1. Do the math, Zola. You're the math genius. That's 40 grand. "I am doing the math," Zola said, her fingers tightening around the empty tin until the metal popped. "The math says you took my rent money. The math says you took the tuition deposit I was saving to go back to finish my actuarial degree. The math says we have $12 in the checking account." "It didn't win," Jax mumbled, finally looking at her with those wide, watery eyes that used to make her heart melt when they were 18. Now, at 24, they just made her tired. "The horse, it tripped. It was a fluke, Zola. Bad luck." "It's not bad luck, Jax. It's a pattern." Zola dropped the tin into the trash. Clang. She should leave. Any rational person would leave, but the lease was in her name, his credit score was lower than the temperature outside, and his mother had made Zola promise on her deathbed to look out for him. Guilt was a heavier chain than iron. She looked at the clock. 6:45 p.m. She was going to be late. "I have to go to work," Zola said, grabbing her heavy wool coat. It was 3 years old and fraying at the cuffs, but it was warm. "The hotel?" Jax perked up, scrambling off the couch. "Babe, can you get an advance? Just a small one. The bookie, this guy Vinny, he's not patient. He said something about knees." Zola paused at the door. She looked at the man she had wasted 6 years on. She felt the heavy, crushing weight of her own pride. She was top of her class in statistics. She could calculate risk ratios in her head faster than most people could type. And yet, here she was, the night manager of a hotel, cleaning up the messes of a man who treated her savings like a slot machine. "I'm not asking for an advance, Jax," she said coldly. "I have dignity. Figure it out." She slammed the door before he could beg. The city wind bit at her face as she walked the 12 blocks to the Aethelgard. Most people walked past the building without ever seeing it. It sat on a corner in the historic district, a monolith of black stone and Gothic gargoyles. There was no signage, no doorman in a top hat, and definitely no vacancy light. The Aethelgard wasn't for tourists. It was a long-term rehabilitation sanctuary for eccentric, high-net-worth individuals. That was the corporate line. In reality, Zola suspected it was a safe house for the mob, or maybe the Illuminati. The guests were strange. They arrived in the middle of the night, usually injured, usually surrounded by terrifying bodyguards. They ate absurd amounts of raw meat. They paid in cash or gold bullion, and they valued one thing above all else: Silence. Zola was good at silence. She was good at keeping secrets, balancing the private ledgers, and ensuring these special dietary requests, usually 10 pounds of steak tartare, were delivered promptly. She keyed her card into the staff entrance. The heavy steel door hissed open. "You're late," Marcus grunted, the head of security. He was a massive man who looked like he had been carved out of granite. He liked Zola because she did his tax returns for free during her breaks. "Boyfriend trouble," Zola muttered, punching her time card. "Marcus, hypothetically, if a man gambled away $4,000, how much creates reasonable grounds for murder?" Marcus cracked a rare smile. "In this building, about $5. He handed her a clipboard. His expression turned serious. "Heads up, Zola. We have a code black in the penthouse." Zola froze. Code black? That means a high-risk intake. "Very high risk," Marcus warned. "Arrived an hour ago, bypassed the nursing staff. The client specifically requested minimal contact. He's volatile. 2 nurses have already quit. 1 is currently crying in the break room because he growled at her." "He growled?" Zola asked, raising an eyebrow. "What is he, a feral badger?" "He's big, he's rich, and he's apparently in a lot of pain. Management wants you up there. You're the only one who doesn't faint when they get scary." Zola sighed, adjusting her name tag. "Zola Vance, night manager." "Fine," she said, marching toward the elevator. "I deal with a man-child at home who loses my money. I can deal with a billionaire who needs a timeout. Send up the soup." She didn't know it yet, but as the brass doors of the elevator closed, she was leaving her normal life behind. The math was about to change. The elevator chimed, opening directly into the penthouse foyer. Usually the penthouse smelled of lemon verbena and old money. Tonight it smelled of copper, ozone, and destroyed mahogany. Zola stepped out, clutching her clipboard like a shield. The scene before her was a disaster zone. A Ming vase, probably worth more than Zola's entire student loan debt, lay in shattered blue shards on the rug. A heavy armchair had been overturned. Standing by the double doors to the master bedroom were 2 of the hotel's special security staff. These weren't normal rent-a-cops. These were men who looked like they ate barbed wire for breakfast. And right now, they looked terrified. "He won't let us in," one guard whispered, his face pale. "He threw a lamp at Jenkins. Jenkins is concussed." "He's a patient, not a poltergeist," Zola said, stepping over the debris. "Open the door." "Ma'am, I really don't think—" "Open it, or I'll dock your pay for the broken vase." The guard swallowed hard and pushed the heavy oak doors open. The master bedroom was plunged in darkness, the blackout curtains drawn tight. The only light came from the hallway, cutting a slice across the room. In the center of the massive king-sized bed sat a figure that looked less like a man and more like a nightmare carved out of shadow and scars. He was huge, broad-shouldered and shirtless, his torso wrapped in bloody bandages that were already soaking through. His face was a ruin of bruises. His eyes were hidden behind thick gauze, swollen and sightless. He was blind, wounded, and radiating a hostility so palpable it felt like static electricity against Zola's skin. "Get out," a voice rasped. It sounded like gravel grinding in a mixer. "No can do, Mr. Sunshine," Zola said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She marched into the room and flipped the light switch. The man hissed at the sudden brightness, his head jerking away as if the light physically hurt his heightened senses. He bared his teeth, teeth that looked uncomfortably sharp. "I said, leave," he roared, thrashing against the sheets. "I will break you." "You can't even see me to break me," Zola countered, walking to the bedside table. She set down the tray of broth and painkillers. "And frankly, I've had a terrible night. My boyfriend lost my rent money, my feet hurt, and I really don't have the patience for a temper tantrum from a grown man in luxury sheets." The man went still. He tilted his head, listening. He wasn't used to being spoken to. He was used to being obeyed. He leaned forward, sniffing the air loudly. It was a strange, animalistic intake of breath. Then a low, rumbling sound started in his chest. It wasn't a groan of pain. It was a growl, a deep, subsonic vibration that rattled the water glass on the nightstand. It was a warning sound, a predator telling prey to run. It should have terrified her, But Zola was tired, Zola was broke, and Zola had spent 6 years dealing with Jax's whining. "Oh, for the love of God," Zola sighed. She stepped right up to the edge of the bed. The man snarled, snapping his jaw in her direction, a clear threat. Zola didn't flinch. She reached out and placed her hand firmly on top of his messy, dark hair. She patted him. Pat, pat. "Stop it," she scolded firmly, like she was talking to the neighbor's aggressive golden retriever. "No growling. We use our inside voices in this hotel. Drop the attitude." The man froze. His mouth snapped shut. His body, which had been coiled tight enough to snap steel, went rigid. The growl cut off instantly, leaving a silence so loud it rang in Zola's ears. Behind her, in the doorway, the 2 guards gasped in unison. Chapter 3. The Purr. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. Zola kept her hand on his head. His hair was surprisingly soft, thick, and clean despite the blood on his bandages. Under her palm, she could feel the heat radiating from him. He was burning up with a fever that would hospitalize a normal person. "Did you?" the man whispered. His voice was no longer a roar. It was stunned, breathless. "Did you just pat me?" "Yes," Zola said, removing her hand and crossing her arms. "And I'll do it again if you keep acting like a grumpy toddler. Now, are we going to behave, or do I have to call maintenance to crate you?" The man didn't answer. He slowly leaned forward. He didn't attack. He didn't scream. He leaned toward the space where her hand had just been. He looked bereft. Then he did something that defied all laws of biology and mob boss dignity. He leaned his forehead against Zola's stomach. He slumped forward, his massive shoulders dropping as if his strings had been cut. He let out a long, shuddering exhale, and then the sound started. It started deep in his chest, a heavy, rhythmic vibration. It traveled through his ribs and into Zola's stomach, where he was resting his head. It wasn't a growl, it was deeper, richer. It was a sound of absolute, heavy contentment. It was a purr. Zola looked down at the top of his head, her eyes wide. She looked back at the guards. "Is he?" Zola mouthed silently. "Is he purring?" The guards looked like they were witnessing a miracle or an apocalypse. They shook their heads frantically, backing away and closing the door, leaving Zola alone with the vibrating giant. "Okay," Zola said nervously, trying to step back, but the man wrapped his arms around her waist. It wasn't a trap, it was an anchor. He held on like she was the only solid thing in a spinning world. "Quiet," the man mumbled into her scrubs. "The static, it stopped. You stopped the noise." I didn't do anything," Zola stammered, poking his shoulder with one finger. "Sir, you're violating several HR policies right now." "Don't leave," the man commanded, his voice muffled. "Just stay. 5 minutes. The silence. I need the silence." Zola looked at the ceiling. She looked at the destroyed room. She looked at the man who could probably snap her in half, but was currently cuddling her midsection like a giant, dangerous teddy bear. She sighed. 5 minutes, she negotiated, "but then you eat the soup, and if you bite me, I'm charging you double." The purr got louder. Chapter 4. The Soup Standoff. 10 minutes later, Zola had managed to extract herself from the hug, but the dynamic in the room had shifted permanently. Saurin, though Zola only knew him as Mr. Black from the guest registry, was sitting up against the headboard. He looked less like a monster now and more like a sulking statue. "I do not want the broth," Saurin grunted, turning his bandaged face away. "I want meat. Rare." "The kitchen is closed," Zola lied smoothly, stirring the bowl of chicken broth she held. "And you have internal bleeding. If I give you a steak, your stomach will revolt, and I am not cleaning that up. I draw the line at projectile vomiting." "I heal fast," Saurin argued. "I need protein." "You need to listen to your nurse. Open." She held the spoon to his lips. Saurin kept his mouth shut tight. He looked ridiculous, a terrifying, scar-covered warlord engaging in a battle of wills over a spoonful of Campbell's. "Mr. Black," Zola said, her voice dropping into her teacher voice, I have been awake for 20 hours. My feet are swollen. My patience is thinner than this soup. If you don't eat this, I'm going to leave, and I'm going to send Nurse Ratched back in. You know, the one with the cold hands and the shrill voice." Sorin flinched. He hated the other nurses. Their fear smelled sour. It made his wolf agitated. But Sola smelled like vanilla, old paper, and antiseptic. She smelled like order. He opened his mouth. Zola fed him. It was a surprisingly intimate act. She had to guide the spoon carefully because of his temporary blindness. She was gentle, wiping a stray drop from his chin with her thumb without thinking. Sorin froze at the touch of her skin on his jaw. His heart rate monitor, which Zola had hooked up, beeped a sudden, rapid staccato. "Beep, beep, beep." "Easy," Zola murmured, thinking he was in pain. "It's just soup." It wasn't just soup. To Sorin, every touch was electric. He was a wolf who had been feral for a decade, living in the wilds, deprived of softness. And now his mate was here, feeding him, scolding him, caring for him. "Who are you?" he asked roughly, swallowing the broth. "You aren't a nurse. You don't smell fearful." "I'm the night manager," Zola said, scraping the bottom of the bowl. "I'm basically a glorified babysitter for rich people who make bad life choices. Which brings me to you. Who beats up a man this size? Did you fall into a wood chipper?" Sorin hesitated. He couldn't tell her he was the Alpha King, poisoned by the Usurper Council and hunted by assassins. "Business dispute," he grunted. "Must be some intense business," Zola said dryly. "What do? Import-export of illegal fireworks? Underground shark wrestling?" "Something like that," Sorin muttered. "Well, stop it," Zola said, setting the empty bowl down. "Shark wrestling is bad for your complexion." Sorin felt a strange sensation in his chest, a twitch of his lips. He realized with shock that he was smiling. Chapter 5. The Fever Dreams. The peace didn't last. By 3 a.m., the poison in Sorin's blood, wolfsbane laced with silver nitrate, hit its peak. Zola was sitting in the armchair she had dragged to the bedside, trying to study a forensic accounting textbook by the light of her phone. A low moan from the bed made her look up. Sorin was thrashing. He had kicked the covers off. His skin was slick with sweat, his muscles seizing in violent spasms. "No," he gasped, his voice terrified. "Don't let them in. The gate! Hold the gate!" He was hallucinating. Zola jumped up and ran to him. She grabbed a cold washcloth from the basin she'd prepared and pressed it to his burning forehead. "Shh," she whispered. "Nobody's here. The gate is closed. You're safe." Sorin didn't hear her. In his mind, he was back in the burning of the Northern Pack lands 10 years ago. He lashed out, his hand clamping around Zola's wrist. His grip was crushing. If he squeezed, he would snap her bone like a dry twig. "Traitor!" he snarled at the invisible enemy. Zola winced at the pain, but didn't pull away. She knew that if she fought him, his predator instinct would escalate. "It's me," Zola said firmly, speaking over his delirium. "It's Zola. I'm the one who patted your head, remember? I'm the one with the soup. Look at me." She used her free hand to cup his cheek, forcing his head toward her. "I'm here," she said softly. "I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here." Something about her voice cut through the nightmare. The static, the endless screaming of the pack connection in his head quieted down to a hum. Sorin's grip on her wrist loosened. His fingers slid down to lace with hers. He held her hand tightly, pressing it against his chest, right over his heart. "Anchor," he slurred, his breathing evening out. "Mine." Sure," Zola whispered, smoothing his sweaty hair back. "I'm yours. Just go back to sleep, big guy." She didn't know he meant it literally. She sat on the edge of the bed for the rest of the night, letting the terrifying mobster hold her hand like a lifeline. And for the first time in 6 years, watching the rise and fall of his chest, Zola didn't feel the crushing weight of her own life. She felt needed. She fell asleep sitting up, her head resting on his shoulder, unaware that the beast beneath her was already plotting how to keep her forever. Chapter 6. The Mobster Hypothesis. Sunlight hit Zola's face like a physical slap. She groaned, her neck stiff, her mouth tasting like wool and exhaustion. She tried to sit up, but she was anchored by a heavy weight. She blinked one eye open. She was not in her apartment. She was in the penthouse, and she was currently using the shoulder of a terrifying, bandaged warlord as a pillow. Zola froze. Her hand was still laced with his, resting on his chest, and, to her absolute mortification, there was a small, damp spot on his shoulder where she had drooled. "You snore," a deep voice rumbled. Zola scrambled back so fast she nearly fell off the bed. She smoothed her scrubs frantically, her face heating up. "I do not snore," she defended, grabbing her clipboard to look busy. "I perform rhythmic breathing exercises. It's stress management." Sorin was watching her. The bandages were still over his eyes, but he had turned his head to track her movement. He looked better. The fever had broken, leaving his skin pale but cool. He looked less like a dying beast and more like a dangerous statue that had decided to wake up. "You stayed," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement filled with a strange kind of wonder. "I fell asleep," Zola corrected, checking his heart rate monitor. "Don't read into it. I charge extra for overnight cuddling." Sorin didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth twitched. "You held my hand. You talked me down from the gate." "You were hallucinating," Zola said, trying to keep her voice professional. "You were screaming about gates and traitors, which honestly confirms my theory." Sorin tilted his head. "Your theory?" "About who you are," Zola said, crossing her arms. "I've run the numbers. You have bullet wounds, claw marks, which I assume are from some exotic illegal pet, maybe a tiger, and you have guards named Boris and Tiny outside. You pay in gold." She leaned in, whispering conspiratorially. "You're a mob boss, or a triad leader. You're in a turf war over, I don't know, olive oil imports, cryptocurrency?" Sorin was silent. Under the bandages, his golden eyes were wide open. A mob boss. She thought he was a human criminal. He should correct her. He should tell her he was the alpha king of the Continental Pack, the rightful ruler of every shifter from here to the coast. But if he told her that, she would run. Humans terrified of wolves didn't stay. They didn't pat heads. They didn't drool on shoulders. "Olive oil," Sorin agreed gravely. "It is a cutthroat business. Very slippery." Zola rolled her eyes. "Ha ha, funny. Look, Mr. Black, I don't care if you run the underworld. As long as you pay your bill and don't bleed on the duvet, we're cool. Now, sit up. You smell like a locker room, and since you fired the nursing staff, I have to clean you up." Sorin stiffened. "Clean me?" "Sponge bath," Zola announced, marching toward the bathroom. "And don't get any ideas. I've seen better bodies in anatomy textbooks." That was a lie. As he sat up, the sheet pooling at his waist, Zola swallowed hard. He was carved from granite, scarred and terrifying, and objectively magnificent. This is going to be a long shift, she thought. Chapter 7. The Sponge Bath. The air in the room changed the moment Zola returned with the basin of warm water and the towels. It grew heavy, charged with a static that made the hair on Zola's arms stand up. "I can do it myself," Sorin growled, reaching for the cloth blindly. "Sit down," Zola ordered, slapping his hand away. "You can't see, and you can barely lift your arms without tearing your stitches. Surrender your dignity, Mr. Black, it's faster." Sorin gritted his teeth but obeyed. He sat on the edge of the bed, his legs dangling, looking like a sulking god of war. Zola dipped the cloth in the warm water, wrung it out, and stepped between his spread knees. She tried to ignore the sheer size of him. His thighs were as thick as tree trunks. The heat radiating from his skin was intense. She started with his chest. She wiped away the dried blood and sweat, her movements efficient but gentle. Every time she touched him, a muscle jumped under his skin. "Relax," she murmured, focused on a nasty bruise over his ribs. "I'm not hurting you." "That is not the problem," Sorin rasped, his hands gripping the sheets until the fabric tore. Zola paused. She traced a long, jagged white scar that ran from his shoulder to his hip. It was old. "This wasn't a knife," she whispered, her finger following the line of raised flesh. "It's too jagged, and there are 3 parallel lines. What did this to you? A bear?" "A wolf," Sorin said, his voice dark. "A very large, very angry wolf." "Must have been a big dog," Zola muttered, moving the cloth lower toward his abdomen. Sorin sucked in a sharp breath. The scent of her, vanilla and soap, was overwhelming him. His wolf was pacing inside his mind, howling to claim her, to pull her down onto the mattress and mark her. It took every ounce of his legendary will to keep his hands on the bed. "You missed a spot," he choked out, trying to distract himself. "I did not," Zola argued, scrubbing a patch of dried mud on his oblique. "Stop backseat bathing." She moved to his back. She leaned in close to reach his shoulder blades, her chest brushing against his arm. A low, vibrating sound started in his chest again. Zola froze. "Are you purring again?" "No," Sorin lied immediately. "It's lung congestion, from the smoke." "Right," Zola said, suppressing a smile. "Congestion. Well, try not to congest too loud or the guards will think I'm torturing you with a vibrator." Sorin let out a short, bark-like laugh. It was a rusty sound, like he hadn't used it in years. "You are insolent, Zola Vance," he said softly. "I'm efficient," she corrected, stepping back and tossing the cloth into the basin. "And you're clean. Now put a shirt on. You're distracting the staff." "There is no other staff," Sorin pointed out. "Exactly," Zola said, her cheeks turning pink. She turned on her heel and marched out of the room before he could say another word. Chapter 8. The Runt Returns. The peace of the morning was shattered by the shrill ring of a cell phone. Zola was sitting on the sofa in the penthouse living area, organizing Sorin's business ledgers, which were actually encrypted Pack financial records that made no sense, so she was color-coding them just to feel useful. She looked at the caller ID. Jax. Her stomach dropped. She let it ring. It rang again immediately, and again. "Answer it," Sorin called from the bedroom. His hearing was unnaturally sharp. He could hear the vibration of the phone against the glass table. Zola sighed and picked up. "What, Jax?" "Zola! Thank God!" Jax's voice was high-pitched, frantic. "Babe, you gotta help me. Vinny, the loan shark, he's not waiting anymore. He sent guys to the apartment. They took the TV." "Good," Zola said coldly, clutching the phone tight. "Maybe you'll read a book." "This isn't a joke. They said if I don't have the $5,000 by Friday, they're going to break my fingers. I need the money, Zola. Ask your boss. Ask the hotel, please." Zola closed her eyes. She felt the old, familiar exhaustion settle into her bones. "I told you, Jax. No, I am done fixing your messes. You gambled the money, you deal with Vinny." "You selfish bitch!" Jax screamed. The venom in his voice was sudden and ugly. "After everything I did for you, I let you live in my apartment. Zola hung up. She stared at the phone, her hand shaking. "Who is he?" Zola jumped. Sorin was standing in the doorway of the bedroom. He was leaning heavily against the frame, wearing a fresh black t-shirt and loose sweatpants. He shouldn't have been walking, but he looked ready to kill. His face was terrifying. The bandages were off his eyes now, revealing the dark, swollen bruising around them, but his golden irises were burning with a cold, lethal rage. "Nobody," Zola said, shoving the phone into her pocket. "Just spam call." "Liar," Sorin growled. He limped toward her. He moved like a predator, even injured. "I heard him. He called you a name. He threatened you." "He's my boyfriend," Zola admitted, the shame burning her throat. "Ex-boyfriend. Sort of. It's complicated." "He asked for money," Sorin said, stopping in front of her. He towered over her, blocking out the light. "He is the one who drained your savings, the reason you walked to work in the rain?" "It's my problem, Mr. Black." Zola lifted her chin. "I handle my own problems." "You are doing a poor job," Sorin stated bluntly. "Give me his name. I will have Boris pay him a visit. He will not bother you again." "No!" Zola stepped between Sorin and the door, holding up her hands. "Absolutely not. I know what pay a visit means in your line of work. You are not breaking his legs." Sorin looked confused. "I wasn't going to break his legs. I was going to remove his tongue. It is more efficient." "No tongue removal," Zola shouted. "God, you are barbaric.
Listen to me. I do not want your help. I do not want your money. I want to earn my way out of this mess with my dignity intact. Do you understand?" Sorin stared at her. He looked at her fierce eyes, her proud stance. Most women would have begged him to kill Jax. Zola was protecting the worm because of her own honor. It frustrated him, it enraged him, and it made him want her so much his teeth ached. "Fine," he snarled, turning away. "Keep your dignity, but if he comes near you, Zola, I will not ask for permission."
Chapter 9. The First Gift. Sorin sat in the armchair by the window, brooding. His wolf was pacing in circles inside his mind. Mate is distressed. Mate is threatened by runt. Kill runt. Provide for mate. It was simple biology, but Zola made everything complicated with her laws and morals. He couldn't kill Jax, yet, but he could provide. He watched Zola dusting the bookshelf. She looked tired. Her shoes were worn out. She was eating an apple for lunch because she couldn't afford the cafeteria food. He needed to give her something. In the wolf world, courting gifts were simple. You brought your intended a fresh kill to show you were a capable hunter. A deer, a rabbit, maybe a rogue wolf's head if you were feeling romantic. He looked at the phone Zola had left on the table. He couldn't go hunting in the city, but he had resources. He picked up the hotel phone and dialed Boris. "Get me the best," Sorin ordered into the receiver. "Top quality, expensive, delivered to the balcony tonight." Boss?" Boris's voice crackled. "You mean weapons?" "No, you idiot. Food, sustenance. She is too thin." That night, Zola was finishing her shift. She went to the balcony to close the doors against the wind. She stopped. Sitting in the center of the balcony table was a massive silver platter covered by a dome. "What is this?" she asked, turning to Sorin. Sorin was pretending to read a newspaper, but he was watching her over the top of it, his ears practically twitching with anticipation. "A gift," he grunted. "You are scrawny. Eat." Zola lifted the dome. She screamed. It wasn't a steak. It wasn't a sandwich. Sitting on the silver platter was a whole, raw, unskinned leg of venison, hoof and all. It looked like it had been freshly hacked off a deer. Blood was pooling on the silver. "Oh my God!" Zola gagged, dropping the lid. "What is that? Is that Bambi's leg?" Sorin lowered the newspaper, looking genuinely confused. "It is venison. Organic. Boris said it was the freshest cut." "It has fur on it," Zola yelled, backing away. "You ordered me a severed leg? What kind of mobster are you? Is this a threat? Does this mean I'm next?" "It means I can provide," Sorin roared, standing up, offended. "It is high protein. Why are you screaming?" "Because normal people eat burgers, Sorin. Cooked burgers. Take it away." Sorin stared at the rejected leg. He stared at his horrified mate. He sighed, running a hand down his face. Humans were so difficult. "Fine," he grumbled, picking up the heavy platter with one hand. "I will eat it, but you are ungrateful." "I am traumatized," Zola retorted. As he sulked away to the kitchen to dispose of the gift by eating it raw when she wasn't looking, Zola leaned against the glass door, shaking her head. He was crazy. He was violent. He gave terrible gifts. But he was trying, and despite the severed leg, no one had ever tried to take care of her before. She watched him go, a small, reluctant smile tugging at her lips. Chapter 10. The Doorman. Recovery for Sorin was a test of patience he was rapidly failing. His wolf was restless. The animal inside him prowled the cage of his mind, demanding two things: to hunt and to keep his mate within eyesight at all times. Since he couldn't hunt in the middle of the city without alerting the usurper council, he focused entirely on the second demand. He sat on the velvet sofa in the dark living room of the penthouse, watching the security feed on the tablet Boris had given him. It showed the lobby of the Aethelgard. Zola had just walked in. She looked exhausted, but beautiful. She was wearing her oversized wool coat and a red scarf that made her pale skin glow. Sorin felt a pang of possession so sharp it felt like a physical blow. Mine. Then the doorman, a young new hire named Kyle, stepped forward to open the inner door for her. That was fine. That was his job. But then Kyle smiled, a wide, toothy, flirtatious smile. He said something that made Zola laugh. He reached out and touched her elbow, a lingering, unnecessary touch to guide her through the door. Sorin didn't think. He didn't reason. A low, thunderous growl tore from his throat. He crushed the tablet in his hand, the glass screen spiderwebbing into dust. He stood up and stormed toward the private elevator. He was shirtless, barefoot, and furious. Down in the lobby, Zola was just thanking Kyle for the compliment on her scarf when the elevator dinged. The doors slid open. Sorin Blackwood stepped out. He looked like a god of thunder who had descended from Mount Olympus specifically to murder a minimum-wage employee. His scars were stark under the lobby lights, his muscles coiled tight, and his eyes were burning with a terrifying predator intensity. He didn't speak. He just stared at Kyle. Kyle turned pale. He backed up against the reception desk. "Mr. Black, can I help you?" Sorin stalked forward, entering Kyle's personal space. He leaned down, baring his teeth in a silent snarl that promised violence. Zola blinked. She looked at Kyle, who was about to wet his pants, and then at Sorin, who was posturing like a jealous gorilla. "Hey!" Zola rolled up the Financial Times newspaper sitting on the reception desk. She marched up to the terrifying warlord. Thwack! She bopped him right on the nose with the newspaper. "No," Zola said firmly. "Bad boss. We do not terrorize the staff." The lobby went silent. The receptionist dropped her pen. Kyle looked like he was witnessing a suicide. Sorin blinked, recoiling slightly. He looked down at Zola, his expression shifting from murderous rage to baffled shock. She had hit him with a newspaper? "He touched you," Sorin grunted, pointing a threatening finger at Kyle. "He held the door," Zola argued. "That is his job. You are acting crazy. Go back upstairs before I call HR. Do we even have HR, or do you just throw complaints into a furnace?" Sorin stared at her. His wolf was confused. The mate was not impressed with his display of dominance. The mate was annoyed. He looked at Kyle, then back at Zola. He let out a huff of air. "Fine," he grumbled, "but if he touches you again, I'm firing him, out of a cannon." He turned and stomped back into the elevator, sulking. Zola sighed, smoothing her scarf. She turned to the terrified doorman. "Sorry about that, Kyle. He gets cranky when he misses his nap." Chapter 11. The Ledgers. Zola entered the penthouse 10 minutes later to find Sorin sitting at the dining table, surrounded by piles of paper. He looked frustrated. He was gripping a pen like he wanted to stab the paper with it. "What are you doing?" Zola asked, hanging up her coat. "I thought doctors ordered bed rest, not paperwork." "I am trying to trace a discrepancy," Sorin muttered, rubbing his temples. "My associates in the valley send these reports. They claim the resource allocation is balanced, but the supply lines are failing. The numbers do not make sense." Zola walked over. She glanced at the papers. To Sorin, these were the treaty records of the Crimson Valley Pack, detailing hunting grounds, border patrols, and tithes. To Zola, they looked like the messiest, most convoluted shipping manifest she had ever seen. "Move over," she said, pulling a chair up. "This is confidential," Sorin warned, shielding the paper. "Mob business." "Mob business is just math with guns," Zola scoffed. She pulled the ledger from under his hand. "Let me see." She scanned the columns. Her eyes narrowed. Her brain, wired for patterns and logic, kicked into gear. "Here," she said, pointing a manicured nail at the third column. "And here. Look at the recurring overhead for security consultations. It's a fixed percentage, but it's being deducted pre-tax in one column and post-expense in the other. It's a double dip." She grabbed his pen. She started circling numbers, drawing lines connecting the northern warehouse, which was actually a pack armory, to a shell company in the Caymans. "Someone isn't just bad at math, Mr. Black," Zola murmured, her eyes darting across the page. "Someone is skimming. Look at the ratios. Every time a shipment goes through the valley, 12% of the value vanishes into miscellaneous loss. That's statistically impossible for standard breakage. It's theft." Sorin watched her. He wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking at her. He watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration. He watched the way she chewed on the end of the pen. He watched her mind, sharp, brilliant, and ruthless, tear apart a forensic puzzle that had stumped his best advisors for months.
He felt a stir of arousal that had nothing to do with her body and everything to do with her competence. She wasn't just a soft caregiver. She was a strategist. She was a queen. "Found it," Zola announced triumphantly, circling a final figure. "Whoever Elder Silas is, he owes you about $3 million, or the equivalent in whatever you guys trade. Illegal cigars?" Sorin stared at the name she had circled. Elder Silas, the head of the council, the man who had likely poisoned him. Zola had just handed him the smoking gun. "You are incredible," Sorin whispered, his voice rough. Zola looked up, startled by the intensity in his tone. "I'm just an accountant, Sorin. Math doesn't lie. People do." Sorin reached out. He tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering on her jaw. "You are worth more than all the gold in this vault, Zola Vance." For a moment, the air crackled. Zola forgot to breathe. She forgot he was a dangerous criminal. She just saw a man who looked at her like she was the solution to every equation in the universe.
Chapter 12. The Thief. Friday came with a cold rain. Zola was at her apartment getting ready for her shift. She was tired. The tension with Saurin, the almost kiss over the ledgers, the way he watched her was keeping her awake at night. A knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find Jax. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, but he was holding 2 cups of coffee from her favored expensive cafe. "Peace offering?" he asked, his voice cracking. "I know I messed up, Zo. I know I'm a screw-up. I wanted to say sorry." Zola looked at the coffee. She looked at the man she had loved since high school. She knew she should slam the door, but old habits died hard. "Come in," she sighed, stepping back. 5 minutes, Jax, then I have to go to work." Jax walked in. He was jittery. He kept looking around the apartment, his eyes darting to her purse sitting on the kitchen counter. "I'm going to fix this," Jax rambled, sitting on the couch. "I got a plan. Vinny, he gave me an extension. I just need a little time." "That's good, Jax," Zola said, taking a sip of the coffee. It was lukewarm. "I really hope you figure it out, but I meant what I said. I can't give you money." I know. Jax stood up. He walked over to her and hugged her. It was a tight, desperate hug. "I really am sorry, Zola," he whispered into her hair, "for everything." Zola felt a pang of sadness. She patted his back awkwardly. "Okay, Jax, it's okay." She didn't feel his hand slip into her open purse on the counter behind her. She didn't feel his fingers slide into her wallet. She didn't feel him slide the heavy, black magnetic keycard, the master access pass to the Aethelgard, out of its slot and into his sleeve. "I should go," Jax said abruptly, pulling away. He looked sweaty. "Don't want to make you late." He bolted out the door before Zola could say goodbye. Zola shook her head, finishing her coffee. She felt a strange sense of relief. Maybe he was finally growing up. Maybe he was finally moving on. She grabbed her purse, threw on her coat, and headed out into the rain, completely unaware that she was carrying an empty wallet and a death sentence for the man she was starting to love. Chapter 13. The Breach. The lobby of the Aethelgard was quiet. Zola shook out her umbrella and walked to the secure staff entrance. She reached into her purse for her pass. Her fingers brushed leather, receipts, lipstick. No card. She frowned. She dug deeper. She dumped the contents of the purse onto the small side table. Gum wrappers, tampons, penny rolls. The black card was gone. Strange. I swore I put it back. A cold prickle of unease started at the base of her neck. She remembered Jax. She remembered the hug, the way he had stood right next to the counter. "I really am sorry, Zola." "No," she whispered. "He wouldn't. He couldn't." But she knew he could. Jax was a gambler, and a desperate gambler would sell his own mother for a sure thing. She grabbed her phone and dialed Jax. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed again. This time, someone answered, but it wasn't Jax. "Hello, Zola," a smooth, unfamiliar voice said. It sounded like oil sliding over gravel. "Who is this?" Zola demanded, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Where is Jax?" "Jax is detained," the voice said. "He was very helpful.
He gave us the key. Our source inside confirmed the back elevator bypasses security. The world dropped out from under Zola's feet. You can't go up there, she gasped. The guards are dealt with, the voice said calmly. Thank you for the access, Ms. Vance. You've been very cooperative. Click. Zola stared at the phone, the back elevator, the private service lift that opened directly into the penthouse bedroom, the one Saurin kept unlocked for her because he trusted her. Saurin was up there, alone, injured, sleeping, and thanks to her, the killers had the key. Zola didn't scream. She didn't freeze. She slung her purse strap over her shoulder, kicked off her heels, and started to run. She ran toward the stairwell. She had to beat the elevator. She had to warn him. 20 flights of stairs. She hit the first step and sprinted, her lungs burning, screaming his name in her head.
Chapter 14. The Intrusion. Zola's lungs were burning. By the time she reached the 20th floor, her legs felt like lead and her chest felt like it was filled with broken glass. She burst out of the stairwell door, gasping for air, her vision spotting with black dots. The hallway to the penthouse was silent. Too silent. Where was Boris? Where was Tiny? The usual wall of muscle that guarded the entrance was gone. The heavy double doors at the end of the hall were slightly ajar. "Saurin," she whispered, a prayer and a plea. She crept forward, her socks silent on the carpet. She reached into her purse and gripped the only weapon she had, a heavy-duty taser she carried for late-night walks home. It wasn't much against professional hitmen, but it was better than a stapler. She reached the doors. She peeked through the crack. The living room was a wreck. 4 men in tactical black gear were in the room. They weren't moving like burglars. They were moving like a SWAT team. Saurin was awake. He was backed into the corner near the fireplace. He was wearing only sweatpants, his chest bare and glistening with sweat. He looked terrifying, a cornered animal radiating lethal intent. He held a heavy iron fireplace poker in one hand, his knuckles white. "Where is the ledger?" one of the men asked. His voice was calm, bored. He held a suppressed pistol leveled at Saurin's chest. "We know you have the records, Your Highness." "Your Highness?" Zola frowned, confused. Why were they calling a mobster Your Highness? "Come and get it," Saurin snarled. His voice wasn't human. It was a vibrating, subsonic growl that shook the window panes. "Have it your way." The gunman fired. Thwip. Saurin moved with unnatural speed. He dodged the bullet, which shattered a vase behind him, and lunged. He swung the iron poker, connecting with the gunman's wrist with a sickening crunch. The gun flew across the room. But the other 3 men swarmed him. They didn't use guns. They pulled out electric batons, cattle prods crackling with blue lightning. They jabbed Saurin in the ribs, the back, the neck. Saurin roared in agony, dropping to one knee. The electricity was agonizing, locking his muscles. "Stop it!" Zola didn't think. She kicked the door open and charged in. "Leave him alone!" she screamed. The men turned, surprised by the sudden appearance of a small woman in wool socks wielding a pink taser. "Zola!" Saurin bellowed, his eyes wide with horror. "Run!" "No!" Zola yelled. She jammed her taser into the nearest attacker. Zap! The man convulsed and dropped, foaming at the mouth. "One down," Zola shouted, her hands shaking. "Who wants next?" The leader of the group, a scarred man with cold eyes, didn't look impressed. He backhanded Zola across the face. The force of the blow threw her across the room. She hit the wall hard, sliding down dazed, tasting blood. "Deal with the girl," the leader ordered, "then skin the wolf." One of the men pulled a knife and stepped toward Zola. Saurin saw the blood on Zola's lip. He saw the knife. Something inside him snapped. The tether of his humanity, frayed and thin, finally broke. Chapter 15. The Shift. "No!" Saurin's scream tore into a roar that sounded like tectonic plates grinding together. He stood up, ignoring the cattle prods shocking his skin. He grabbed the man holding the baton and threw him, physically threw a 200-pound man through the glass coffee table. But the physical limitations of his human form weren't enough. He needed more speed. He needed more power. He needed the beast. Zola, blinking stars from her eyes, watched in absolute horror as Sorin's body began to wrong itself. His spine arced backward with a sickening crack. His shoulders broadened, the skin splitting as massive muscles surged underneath. "What is happening?" Zola whispered, pressing herself into the wall. "Oh my God, is he having a seizure?" It wasn't a seizure. Dark, coarse fur erupted from his skin, his jaw unhinged, elongating into a muzzle filled with rows of razor-sharp white daggers. His hands twisted, fingers fusing and lengthening into massive clawed paws. The sound was wet and crunching, bones breaking and knitting back together in seconds. The clothes, his sweatpants, shredded instantly, unable to contain the mass expanding inside them. In 3 seconds, the man was gone. Standing in the center of the room was a wolf, but not a normal wolf. This thing was a prehistoric nightmare. It stood 5 feet high at the shoulder, its fur a mix of midnight black and iron gray. Its eyes were glowing molten gold. It was massive. It was terrifying. It was magnificent. The assassins froze. "By the ancients," one whispered. "He's a dire." The wolf didn't hesitate. He launched himself. It was a massacre. The wolf moved faster than the eye could track. He tore the throat out of the man with the knife before the guy could even scream. He spun, his massive tail whipping the leader off his feet, and clamped his jaws around the man's arm, snapping the bone like a twig. The room filled with screams and the wet sounds of violence. Zola sat frozen against the wall, clutching her taser, her brain trying to process the impossible. Mobster? Not a mobster. Fur, teeth, big dog, very big dog, werewolf. My patient is a werewolf. I gave a sponge bath to a werewolf. The wolf finished the last assassin, tossing the body aside like a rag doll. The room fell silent save for the heavy, wet panting of the beast. The wolf turned. He looked at Zola. His muzzle was stained crimson. His golden eyes were wild, dilated with the high of the kill. He took a step toward her, a low growl rumbling in his chest. Zola should have run. Every survival instinct she had screamed at her to flee. But she looked at the eyes. They were the same eyes that had watched her fix the ledgers. They were the same eyes that had looked at her with wonder when she fed him soup. "Sorin?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The wolf whined, a high, pathetic sound that didn't match his terrifying size. He lowered his massive head, tucking his tail between his legs. He looked ashamed. He expected her to scream. He expected her to look at him with the same disgust the elders did. Zola didn't scream. She slowly lowered the taser. "Okay," she breathed, her voice shaky but hysterical. "Okay, so the raw venison makes a lot more sense now." Chapter 16. The Flight. The sound of sirens wailed in the distance. Police, or worse, the hotel's cleanup crew, which might be compromised. "We have to go," Zola said, her pragmatic brain kicking back into gear. "Sorin, if you can understand me, we have to leave. Now." The huge wolf nodded. He walked to the bedroom door and looked back, waiting for her. Zola adjusted her purse strap and grabbed the taser. She followed the giant wolf down the service stairwell, praying they wouldn't run into a housekeeping cart. They reached the underground garage. Sorin's black SUV was parked in the corner. The wolf stopped behind a concrete pillar. He looked at Zola, then gestured with his snout for her to turn around. "Oh," Zola said, realizing. "Right, the change back. Privacy. Got it." She turned her back, staring at a no parking sign. Behind her, she heard the sickening sounds of bones snapping again, followed by a heavy thud and a groan of pain. "Zola." Sorin's voice rasped. It was human again, but wrecked. She turned around. Sorin was leaning against the pillar. He was human. He was also completely naked, covered in blood. Some his, mostly others, and shaking from adrenaline crash. Zola's eyes widened. She had given him a sponge bath, sure, but this was everything. She immediately whipped off her heavy wool coat. "Put this on," she ordered, throwing it at him. "And don't you dare bleed on the lining. That's cashmere blend." Sorin caught the coat. He looked at the small, beige women's coat. He looked at his massive, scarred frame.
"It will be tight," he muttered, slipping his arms into the sleeves. The coat barely covered his essentials and strained dangerously at the shoulders. He looked ridiculous and terrified. "You are not screaming," Sorin said, watching her face as he buttoned the coat. "I turned into a monster. I killed 4 men. Why are you not screaming?" "I'm in shock," Zola said, her hands shaking as she dug for his car keys, which she kept in her purse for emergencies. "I'll probably scream later. Maybe Tuesday. Right now, I'm focusing on the fact that if we stay here, we die, and I haven't finished paying off my student loans, so dying is not an option." She unlocked the car. "Get in, I'm driving. You're shivering." Sorin climbed into the passenger seat, his knees hitting the dashboard. He watched Zola fumble the key into the ignition. She didn't have to hotwire it, she had the key, but her hands were shaking so bad she dropped it 3 times. "I am sorry," he whispered, his head resting against the cool glass of the window. "I didn't want you to see the beast." Zola slammed the car into reverse, tires squealing. "Sorin," she said, glancing at him as she sped out of the garage. "You purr when I scratch your head. You're not a beast. You're just a high-maintenance puppy with anger issues. Now, buckle up."
Chapter 17. The Sanctum. They drove for 4 hours, leaving the city lights far behind. Sorin directed her toward the mountains, to a place marked on no map. As they drove, he talked. He told her everything. He wasn't a mobster. He was an alpha. Specifically, the alpha of the Continental Pack, the largest territory of shifters in the country. He had been usurped 10 years ago by a council of corrupt elders who claimed he was too feral to rule. He had survived by living as a rogue, building his strength and preparing to reclaim his throne. "And Jax?" Zola asked, her grip on the steering wheel white-knuckled. "How did Jax get the key?" "He stole it," Sorin said darkly. "And he sold it to the council. He sold me for $5,000. Zola felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. Jax hadn't just gambled her money. He had tried to get her killed. The last shred of loyalty she held for him evaporated, replaced by a cold, mathematical rage. "Turn here," Sorin instructed. They turned onto a dirt road that wound through an ancient, dense forest. The trees were huge, towering redwoods that blocked out the sky. Eventually, they reached a massive iron gate guarded by men with assault rifles. Sorin rolled down the window. He leaned out. He didn't speak. He just flashed his eyes, a brief flare of alpha gold. The guards' eyes widened. They smelled him, the scent of the true king. They immediately dropped to one knee, bowing their heads. "Open the gate," one shouted. "The king returns." Zola drove through. The sanctum wasn't a campsite. It was a sprawling estate of rustic mansions, training grounds, and cabins. It looked like a billionaire's survivalist compound. They parked in front of the main lodge. A group of people were waiting on the porch. These weren't guards. They were older, dressed in fine suits and silk robes. The elders. Sorin stepped out of the car. He was still wearing Zola's beige wool coat, which was ripped at the seams, barefoot and covered in dried blood. But he walked with a regal, terrifying power. Zola scrambled out to stand beside him. The lead elder, a man with silver hair and a sneer named Silas, stepped forward. "So," Silas drawled, looking Sorin up and down, "the stray dog returns. And look, he's wearing women's clothing." The other elders snickered. Then Silas looked at Zola. He wrinkled his nose, smelling the air. "And he brought a pet," Silas spat, looking at Zola with pure disgust. "A human. How quaint. Did you bring her for dinner, Sorin, or is she your new chew toy?" Sorin growled. It was a low, dangerous sound. "She is my—" "I'm his accountant," Zola interrupted loudly, stepping forward. "And judging by the deferred maintenance on this building and the cheap polyester blend of your suit, Elder Silas, you desperately need one. Now, is there a bathroom? The king needs to change and I need coffee." Silas blinked. The elders went silent. Sorin looked down at Zola. A slow, terrifying grin spread across his face. The war for the throne had begun, and his queen was already firing shots. Chapter 18. The Challenge. The main lodge of the sanctum was a cavernous hall filled with the scent of pine, wood smoke, and hostility. Sorin stood in the center of the room. He had finally changed out of Zola's ripped beige coat and into a pair of borrowed tactical trousers, though he remained shirtless. His scars were on full display, a map of violence that made the silk-robed elders uncomfortable. Zola stood by his side. She felt small in the room full of apex predators, but she kept her chin up, clutching her purse like it contained state secrets. "You have no claim here, Saurin," Elder Silas announced from the raised dais. He swirled a glass of brandy, looking bored. "You abandoned the pack. You lived as a rogue. You are tainted by the human world. Look at you. You smell like gasoline and vanilla." He sneered at Zola. "I did not abandon the pack," Sorin's voice rumbled, echoing off the rafters. "I was poisoned by you. I survived in the wilds to protect the lineage, and now I am back to take what is mine." "The pack law is clear," another elder, a woman with sharp eyes named Mara, interjected. "A king must be pure. A king must be strong. A king must be worthy." "Then test me," Saurin challenged. He stepped forward, the floorboards groaning under his weight. "Invoke the triad of ancestors. If I pass, I take the throne. If I fail, you can mount my head on the wall." The room gasped. The triad, the 3 trials, hadn't been invoked in a century. They were brutal. They were designed to kill. Silas smiled. It was a cold, predatory smile. He knew Saurin was still recovering from the silver nitrate poisoning. He knew Saurin was weakened. "Very well," Silas agreed. "We accept the challenge. 3 trials. Body, spirit, mind." He stood up. "The first trial begins at sunset, the trial of blood. You will face the pack's champions. No shifting, no weapons, only flesh and bone." Zola grabbed Saurin's arm. "Saurin, you're still healing," she whispered urgently. "Your ribs are barely knit together. You can't fight champions without weapons." Saurin looked down at her. His golden eyes softened. "I do not need weapons, little accountant," he murmured, covering her hand with his own. "I have rage, and I have you watching. That is enough." Chapter 19. Trial 1. Blood. The sun dipped below the tree line, casting the fighting pit in long, bloody shadows. The pit was a circle of packed earth surrounded by hundreds of pack members. They shouted and jeered, hungry for violence. Zola stood in the front row, flanked by Boris and Tiny, who had defected from the hotel to follow their true king. Saurin stepped into the ring. He looked magnificent and terrifying, a wall of scarred muscle and grim determination. The gate opposite him opened. 3 men walked out. They were massive. They were the pack's enforcers, wolves who spent their days lifting boulders and breaking bones. 3 against 1? Zola shouted, outraged. "That's not a trial, that's a mugging." "Silence, human," Silas barked from the viewing stand. "Begin." The first champion lunged. Saurin didn't move until the last second. He sidestepped the blow with a fluid grace that belied his size. He grabbed the attacker's arm, used his own momentum, and slammed him face first into the dirt. Crack. 1 down. The other 2 attacked together. It was brutal. It wasn't the clean, choreographed fighting of movies. It was raw, ugly violence. Fists slammed into flesh, bones crunched. Saurin took a heavy hit to his already injured ribs and grunted, stumbling back. Zola flinched, clutching the railing. "Get up!" she screamed, her voice cutting through the jeers of the crowd. "Saurin, you don't dare lose to these steroid junkies. Watch your left, he's telegraphing the hook." Saurin heard her. Through the haze of pain and adrenaline, her voice was a beacon. Watch left. He ducked. The champion's fist sailed over his head. Saurin drove an uppercut into his solar plexus, folding him in half. He spun and delivered a roundhouse kick to the 3rd man's temple, knocking him unconscious instantly. Silence fell over the arena. Saurin stood alone in the center of the pit. He was bleeding from a cut above his eye, his chest heaving, sweat dripping down his back. But he was standing. He looked up at the dais. He looked straight at Silas. Then he turned and looked at Zola. He didn't row, he didn't pound his chest. He just nodded to her. "I am still here."
Zola let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for an hour. She was shaking. She realized then that she wasn't just watching a fight, she was watching her future fight for his life. And she realized that she would kill anyone who tried to hurt him.
Chapter 20. The Healing Tent. The medical tent smelled of antiseptic and damp earth. Saurin sat on the cot, his adrenaline crashing. The pain was setting in now. His ribs were on fire, and his knuckles were split and raw. Zola was pacing. She was angry, she was terrified. She was cleaning a needle with rubbing alcohol. "Sit still," she snapped, though her hands were gentle as she wiped the blood from his brow. "You are an idiot, a brave, impressive, majestic idiot." "I won," Saurin grunted, wincing as she dabbed alcohol on a cut. "You took a punch to the kidney," Zola scolded, "and you dislocated your thumb. Give me your hand." He offered his massive hand. Zola took it. She aligned the joint. "This is going to hurt," she warned. "Do it." Pop. Saurin hissed, squeezing his eyes shut. He didn't pull away. He leaned his forehead against her shoulder, breathing in her scent. "You were loud," he murmured, a small smile touching his lips. "I heard you screaming." "Kick him in the taco?" "I said tackle," Zola lied, blushing. "And it worked." She finished bandaging his hand. She didn't let go. She stood between his spread knees, her hands resting on his bruised chest. She could feel his heart thundering against her palms. "One down," she whispered, the fear finally bleeding into her voice. 2 to go. "Saurin, what if the next one isn't a fight? What if it's magic? I can't help you with magic." Saurin looked up. His eyes were dark, intense. He reached up and cupped her face, his thumb tracing her lower lip. "You are my anchor, Zola," he said fiercely. "You keep the static away. As long as you are watching, I cannot fail. I will burn the world before I let them take me from you." The air in the tent grew heavy. The distance between them vanished. Saurin leaned in. Zola's breath hitched. She wanted him to kiss her. She wanted to forget the trials and the danger and just lose herself in him. But the tent flap flew open. "Second trial," a guard shouted, not looking apologetic at all. "The trial of spirit. Silas is waiting." Saurin pulled back, a low growl of frustration rumbling in his chest. He kissed Zola's forehead, a hard, promising press of his lips. "Wait for me," he commanded. Then he walked out into the night to face the fire. Chapter 21. Trial 2. Fire. The trial of spirit was not a fight. It was a torture chamber. They stood in a clearing deep in the woods. In the center was a long, narrow path of glowing hot coals. But it wasn't just heat. The coals were infused with memory smoke, a hallucinogenic herb that forced the walker to relive their worst traumas. "Walk the path," Silas commanded, his face gleeful. "If your spirit is pure, you will pass. If you are weak, the madness will break your mind." Saurin stepped up to the edge. He was barefoot. He stepped onto the coals. Hiss. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Zola covered her mouth to stifle a scream. Saurin didn't make a sound. He kept walking. But then the smoke hit him. His eyes glazed over. He stopped in the middle of the path. He began to shake. The illusions took him. He was back in the cage where the council had locked him 10 years ago. He was starving. He was alone. He heard the screams of his parents as they were murdered. He felt the silver chains burning his skin. "No," Saurin whimpered, dropping to his knees on the coals. "I failed. I couldn't save them." "He's breaking," Silas laughed. "Look at him. The king is crying." Zola couldn't take it. She broke through the line of guards. "Saurin!" she screamed. "It's not real. Listen to my voice." She couldn't step on the coals. She would die. But she got as close as she could. "Sorin Blackwood, you are not in a cage. You are in a forest. You have a weird accountant girlfriend who is yelling at you. Wake up." "Girlfriend?" The word cut through the smoke. Saurin's head snapped up. He saw Zola. He saw the fire in her eyes, brighter than the coals beneath his feet. The illusions shattered. The cage dissolved. He wasn't a prisoner. He was a king, and his queen was waiting.
With a roar of defiance, Sorin stood up. He ignored the pain in his feet. He ignored the ghosts screaming in his ears. He marched the rest of the path, step by agonizing step, until he collapsed on the cool grass at the end. He had passed. Zola ran to him, falling to her knees, wrapping her arms around his neck. He smelled of smoke and burnt skin, but he was alive. "I heard you," he rasped, burying his face in her neck. "I'm always calling you, you stubborn, stupid wolf." Silas watched them, his smile vanishing. "He passed," Silas spat, "but the third trial remains. Tomorrow we test the mind." He threw a scroll on the ground. "Decipher the genealogy of the ancients by noon, or you forfeit the crown." Zola looked at the scroll. It was covered in ancient, complex symbols and numbers. Silas smirked. He knew Saurin couldn't read the high language. He knew Saurin was a warrior, not a scholar. But Zola looked closer. She blinked. "Wait," she whispered to herself. "That's not a genealogy. That's a ledger."
Chapter 22. The Night Before. The cabin they were assigned was small, drafty, and smelled of old pine needles. It was a far cry from the luxury of the penthouse, but to Zola, it felt like a bunker. Saurin sat on the edge of the narrow bed. His feet were blistered and raw from the trial of fire. His hands were bruised from the trial of blood. He looked like a ruin of a man, battered and broken, yet his golden eyes followed Zola's every movement with an intensity that made the air feel thin. Zola knelt before him, applying a cooling salve to the burns on his soles. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them to be steady. "You are shaking," Saurin murmured. His voice was rough, a low rumble in the quiet room. "I'm terrified," Zola admitted, not looking up. "Tomorrow is the final trial, the trial of mind. Saurin, you're a warrior, you're a king, but Silas, he's a politician. He's going to rig it. He gave you that scroll because he knows you can't read the high language fluently." Saurin sighed, leaning his head back against the wall. "I can fight 100 men. I can walk through fire. But politics, deception, that was always my weakness. That is how they stole the pack from me 10 years ago. They used laws I didn't understand to chain me." He looked defeated. It broke Zola's heart. "They aren't smarter than you," Zola said fiercely, finishing the bandage. She sat back on her heels, resting her hands on his knees. "They're just sneakier. There's a difference." Saurin reached down and pulled her up. He maneuvered her so she was sitting on his lap, his arms wrapping around her waist like bands of steel. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "If I fail tomorrow," he whispered against her skin, "I want you to run. Boris has a car waiting. Take the money in the safe. Go somewhere they cannot find you." "I'm not going anywhere," Zola said, threading her fingers through his dark hair. "I didn't run when you turned into a giant wolf. I didn't run when assassins tried to tase me. I am certainly not running because of a scroll." Saurin pulled back to look at her. The vulnerability in his eyes was devastating. "Why?" he asked. "Why do you stay? I have nothing to offer you but danger. I am a broken king with no throne." "Because," Zola whispered, cupping his scarred jaw, "you're the only person who ever tried to take care of me. You bought me venison, you idiot. You tried to provide." She leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't a passionate, consuming kiss, not yet. It was soft. It was a promise. It was an anchor dropped in the middle of a storm. "Sleep," Zola commanded, pulling away before things could escalate. She knew he needed rest more than he needed passion right now. "Tomorrow we go to war, and I have a feeling the math is going to work out in our favor." Saurin didn't understand what she meant, but he trusted her. He laid down, pulling her against his chest, and for the first time in 10 years, the Alpha King slept without nightmares. Chapter 23. Trial 3. The Mind. The sun rose over the sanctum, bathing the gathering circle in cold, pale light. The entire pack had gathered. Hundreds of wolves stood in silence, watching. The tension was palpable. If Saurin passed this trial, the elders would be deposed. If he failed, he would be executed. Silas stood in the center of the circle, looking smug. Beside him stood a pedestal holding the ancient scroll, the genealogy of the ancients. "The third trial," Silas boomed, his voice echoing. "The trial of mind. A king must know the history of his people. He must understand the laws that bind us." He gestured to the scroll. "Translate this, Sorin Blackwood. Read the ancient lineage. Prove you have the wisdom to lead." Sorin stepped forward. He walked with a slight limp from his burns, but his head was high. He approached the pedestal. He looked at the scroll. The text was written in archaic runic script. It was complex, winding, and dense. Sorin knew the basics of the language, but this was a mess of dates, numbers, and obscure legal terms. He stared at it. The silence stretched out. "Well," Silas taunted, "can you not read the history of your own bloodline? Or has your time as a rogue made you illiterate?" The crowd murmured. Doubt began to ripple through the pack. A king who couldn't read the law was weak. Sorin's hands clenched into fists. He looked at the symbols. He recognized words like allocation, transfer, and yield, but it didn't look like a family tree. It speaks of the harvest, Sorin rasped, trying to decipher the first line. "The year of the great frost." "Wrong," Silas shouted. "It speaks of the bloodline of the third alpha. You are failing, Sorin. You are failing your people." Sorin looked at Zola. She was standing on the sidelines, her arms crossed, her eyes narrowed behind her glasses. She was staring at the scroll with a laser-like intensity. She tapped her wrist. Time. Sorin took a breath. He knew he couldn't translate it. He was going to lose. Unless he remembered what Zola had said about the ledger in the hotel. Math doesn't lie. He looked at Zola. He nodded. Zola didn't hesitate. She stepped over the line of ash that marked the trial circle. "Halt!" Silas roared. "No outsiders. A human cannot interfere in the sacred trial." Sorin spun around, growling. He placed his massive body between Silas and Zola. "She is my mate. She is my voice. If I'm king, she is queen, and the queen speaks." The pack went silent. It was a breach of tradition, but the alpha's command held weight. Zola walked up to the pedestal. She didn't look scared. She looked annoyed. She adjusted her glasses, pulled a red pen out of her pocket, and looked at the ancient, sacred scroll. "Okay, Silas, first of all, this isn't the original. It's a transcription, and your handwriting is atrocious."
"This isn't a genealogy," Zola announced, her voice cutting through the tension of the silent clearing. She leaned over the pedestal, her nose inches from the parchment. She adjusted her glasses, squinting at the faint, jagged lines near the bottom of the scroll. "I mean, the top half is," she clarified, pointing with her red pen. "This part here, the faded ink, that's hundreds of years old. It lists the ancestors, standard begat and begot stuff." She looked up at Silas, her eyes sharp. "But you got lazy, Silas, or maybe just arrogant." Silas stiffened on the dais. "Do not speak to me of arrogance, human. That is a sacred artifact." "Is it?" Zola countered, "because the ink on the bottom half hasn't even oxidized yet. It smells like—" She sniffed the parchment loudly. "Ballpoint. And these symbols down here aren't ancient runes." She turned to face the confused pack, holding the scroll up for them to see. "He's been using the sacred scroll as his personal scratch pad," Zola shouted. "He thought no one could read the high language, so he used a simple substitution cipher to hide his own records right under your noses. He's been writing his ledger in the margins of your history." "Lies!" Silas screeched, his composure cracking. "She defiles the text." "Nobody touch me," Zola shouted, uncapping her red pen like a switchblade. "I'm not done. Sorin, keep them back." Sorin snarled, his claws extending. He stood guard, a massive wall of muscle, ready to tear apart anyone who came near his brilliant, terrifying mate. Zola turned back to the scroll, her math mode taking over. She started circling the newer, darker symbols with her red pen, desecrating the holy object to reveal the truth. Here, she pointed, slashing a line through a cluster of symbols. Line 42. You claimed this was a tribute to the southern wind, but in this cipher, the rune for wind is just a variable for offshore, and the numerical value next to it, she did a quick calculation in the margin of the scroll. It matches the exact amount missing from the Crimson Valley supply chain I analyzed yesterday, down to the cent. The crowd gasped. And here, Zola continued, relentless, line 80, the tithe for the orphans. It's listed as an expense, but if you cross-reference this date with the public records I pulled on my phone last night, she pulled her phone out of her pocket and held it up next to the scroll. It aligns perfectly with the purchase of a luxury condo in Miami, registered to SYLAS Holdings. Really, Silas, SYLAS? That's the best alias you could come up with? She spun around to face the pact. You haven't been poor because of the hard winters, Zola yelled, her voice ringing with authority. You've been poor because your head elder has been using your sacred history as a cover for a Ponzi scheme. He's been skimming 15% off the top of every hunt, every contract, and every trade for the last decade. She grabbed the heavy scroll and threw it at Silas's feet. It unraveled, revealing the red ink bleeding into the fake runes. He didn't fail the trial of mind, Zola declared, stepping back to stand beside Saurin, breathless but triumphant. You failed the audit, and frankly, your bookkeeping is sloppy. I've seen better money laundering from a vending machine repairman. Silence. Absolute, horrified silence. The pack looked at the scroll lying in the dirt. They saw the fresh red ink highlighting the fraud. They looked at Silas, who was sweating, his face a mask of guilt. Then they looked at Saurin, the king who had fought for them, the king who lived in a cave while Silas bought condos. A low growl started in the back of the crowd, then another, then another. Saurin looked down at Zola. His chest swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. She hadn't just saved him, she had weaponized the one thing the elders thought was boring, the truth. My queen, Saurin rumbled, his voice filled with awe. Zola clicked her pen shut and slid it into her pocket. I'm charging you overtime for this.
Chapter 25. The Verdict. Silas backed away. Lies, he screeched. The human lies. She is a witch. She is an accountant, Saurin roared, and she has exposed you. Saurin stepped forward. The trial was over. The judgment had begun. You stole from my people, Saurin said, his voice deadly calm. You poisoned their king. You starved their children to line your pockets. He looked at the pack. What is the penalty for treason? Saurin asked. Death, the pack roared as one. Silas turned to run, but he didn't get far. Boris and Tiny, the loyal guards, blocked his path. They weren't smiling. I yield, Silas cried, falling to his knees. I yield the throne. Saurin, please, mercy. Saurin stopped in front of him. He looked down at the man who had stolen 10 years of his life. I am not the king of mercy, Saurin said. I am the king of wolves. He turned to Zola. My queen, he said, deferring to her. He committed financial crimes. What is the sentence? Zola looked at Silas. She thought about Jax. She thought about the empty coffee can. She thought about every person who had ever been exploited by a greedy man. Asset forfeiture, Zola said coldly. Seize everything. The condos, the accounts, the fancy suits. Strip him of every penny. She paused, looking at the terrified elder. And then, she added, throw him in the dungeon. I have some tax audits I need to run, and I'm going to need someone to fetch my coffee. The crowd erupted in cheers. It wasn't a bloody execution. It was justice. It was humiliating. It was perfect. Saurin watched her. His chest swelled with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. He hadn't just saved him. She had saved his legacy. He reached out and pulled her into his side. Long live the king, someone shouted. Long live the queen, the crowd answered, louder. Zola adjusted her glasses, hiding a smile. Long live the audit, she whispered. Saurin threw his head back and laughed, a rich, booming sound of pure victory. Chapter 26. The Coronation. The adrenaline crash was worse than the fear. After Silas was dragged away to the dungeons, pending a forensic audit, the mood in the sanctum shifted from a courtroom drama to a riotous celebration. The king had returned. The corrupt regime was over. Zola stood in the corner of the great hall, watching the chaos. Saurin was in the center of a swarm of wolves. They were clapping his back, bowing, and offering him goblets of mead. He looked exhausted, his chest still bandaged, soot from the fire trial streaked across his face. But he was smiling. He looked majestic. He looked like he belonged there. Zola looked down at her dirty wool coat and her scuffed boots. She was a human accountant who liked Sudoku and silence. She had just overthrown a government using a red pen, sure, but looking at the raw, primal power of the pack, she felt a sudden, crushing wave of imposter syndrome. I don't fit here, she thought. I'm not a queen. I'm just the girl who fixes the spreadsheets. She turned to slip out the side door, wanting to give him his moment. Where do you think you are going? The voice was low, rough, and right behind her. Zola squeaked, spinning around. Saurin was there. He had broken away from his adoring subjects the second he saw her move toward the exit. I was just going to find some coffee, Zola lied, clutching her purse. You should stay. They love you. Look at them. They respect me because I am strong, Saurin said, stepping into her personal space, blocking out the rest of the room. But they are alive because you are smart. Do not walk away from me, Zola. The throne is wide enough for two. I'm human, Saurin, Zola whispered, the insecurity leaking out. I don't know how to be a Luna. I don't know how to hunt or howl or... I don't need a hunting partner, Saurin interrupted, taking her hand and placing it on his chest, right over his beating heart. I have hunters. I have warriors. What I need, what I have always needed, is silence, peace. And you are the only peace I have ever known. He turned her around to face the room. He didn't ask for permission. He let out a sharp bark that silenced the hall instantly. My pack, Saurin roared. Behold your queen. He took the heavy iron crown that had been retrieved from the vault. He didn't put it on his own head. He placed it gently on Zola's messy, wind-blown hair. It was too big, slipping sideways, but nobody laughed. The wolves dropped to one knee, not out of fear, out of gratitude. Zola adjusted the crooked crown. She looked at the sea of bowing monsters. She looked at the man who would burn the world for her. Okay, she whispered, a smile finally breaking through. But first order of business, we are getting a coffee machine. Chapter 27. The Cabin. The celebration lasted for hours, but eventually Saurin had enough. He scooped Zola up, ignoring her protest that she could walk, and carried her out of the hall, through the woods to the Alpha's private cabin on the ridge. It was secluded, lit only by the fire Saurin quickly built in the stone hearth. The storm outside lashed against the windows, but inside it was warm, quiet, and thick with tension. Saurin locked the heavy oak door. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home echoed in the room. He turned to look at her. The playful banter of the last few days evaporated. The adrenaline of the trials was gone, leaving only a raw, starving hunger. He looked at her not as an accountant or a savior, but as his mate. Come here, he commanded. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in Zola's bones. Zola walked to him. She stopped inches away. She looked up at his scarred face, his golden eyes burning with intent. You look tired, she whispered, reaching up to touch his cheek. I am not tired, Saurin rasped, catching her wrist and kissing her palm. I am starving. I have waited 10 years to find you. I have waited days to claim you. I am done waiting. He didn't give her time to argue. He swept her into his arms, his mouth crashing down on hers. It wasn't gentle, it was possessive. It was the kiss of a man who had been drowning and finally found air. He tasted of mead and smoke and wildness. Zola gasped, opening for him, and he deepened the kiss, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her breath as his own. He backed her toward the large bed covered in furs. He laid her down as if she were made of glass, following her down, his massive weight covering her, shielding her from the world. Saurin, she breathed, her hands tangling in his hair. I've never been with a wolf before. Then I will ruin you for anyone else, he growled against her neck, his teeth grazing the sensitive skin over her pulse. You are mine, Zola.
my heart, my mind, my soul." He stripped away her clothes with a reverent, shaking hands. When she was bare before him, he looked at her with such intense worship that Zola felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent her life taking care of others, Jax, her parents, the hotel guests. She had always been the strong one, but here, under the heavy weight of the Wolf King, she didn't have to be strong. She could surrender. "Please," she whispered, arcing up into his touch. Saurin groaned, a sound of pure need. He joined their bodies in one fluid, powerful thrust. Zola cried out, overwhelmed by the sensation of being completely filled, completely held. The rhythm he set was ancient and primal. Every thrust claimed a piece of her. The static in his mind was gone, replaced by the golden bond that snapped into place between them, a tether of pure emotion. She could feel his love, his relief, his absolute devotion. As the pleasure crested, Saurin buried his face in her neck. "Mine," he roared, and she felt the sharp prick of his teeth marking the spot where neck met shoulder. It didn't hurt. It felt like coming home. Zola shattered, crying out his name, holding on to his king as the world spun away into white-hot bliss.
Chapter 28, Epilogue. 6 months later, the office of the Alpha King looked different. Gone were the trophies of war and the dusty tapestries. In their place were ergonomic chairs, dual-monitor setups, and a very expensive espresso machine that hummed in the corner. Zola sat behind the massive mahogany desk. She wore a tailored black suit and her silver-rimmed glasses. She looked terrifying. Standing in front of her was a rogue wolf named Kevin. Kevin was handcuffed. He looked like he would rather be fighting a bear than standing in this office. "So, Kevin," Zola said, flipping through a file, "you thought you could poach deer in the northern quadrant without a permit?" I didn't know I needed a permit," Kevin stammered. "It's a forest." "It is a sovereign territory with a carefully managed ecosystem," Zola corrected. "And by poaching, you disrupted the migration patterns, which affects our venison exports, which lowers our quarterly projection by 0.04%. She looked up, her eyes cold. "Do you know what we do to people who mess with my quarterly projections, Kevin?" Kevin swallowed hard, looking at the massive black wolf sleeping on the rug behind the desk. You kill them?" "Worse," Zola said, leaning forward. "We audit them." She slammed a stack of papers on the desk. "I looked into your finances. You haven't paid taxes in 6 years. I'm seizing your truck, your cabin, and garnishing your wages for the next decade." Kevin turned pale. "Please, just beat me up. I'll take the beating." "Denied," Zola said. "Guards, take him away. And get him a W-2 form." Boris dragged the weeping rogue out of the office. Zola sighed, rubbing her temples. Why is everyone so dramatic? A low rumble answered her. The massive black wolf on the rug stood up, shook out his fur, and trotted over to her chair. Saurin shifted. In seconds, the naked, magnificent king of wolves was leaning over her desk, a smirk on his face. "You are ruthless," he murmured, kissing the top of her head. "It is very sexy." "It's necessary," Zola said, organizing her pens. "Oh, and good news. The lawsuit against Jax finalized today." "Did we kill him?" Saurin asked hopefully. "No, Saurin. We bought the building he lives in, raised the rent by 400%, and evicted him for violating the no gambling clause in his lease. He is currently living in his mother's basement in New Jersey." Saurin grinned. "Brutal. I love you." He walked around the desk. He sat on the floor next to her chair, resting his head on her thigh. He closed his eyes, content. "Are you done for the day?" he asked. "Almost," Zola said. She reached down. She ran her fingers through his dark hair, scratching lightly behind his ear. Saurin let out a long, heavy sigh. He leaned his full weight against her leg. And then, loud enough to rattle the pens on the desk, the king of the Continental Pack began to purr. Zola smiled, looking out the window at her kingdom. The math had worked out perfectly. The end. And that is how Zola Vance audited her way into the Alpha King's heart. I really hope you enjoyed The Deadbeat and the Debt. If you loved seeing a heroine who uses her brain and a red pen to tame the beast, please give this video a huge thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button and the bell icon so you get notified the second our next romance drops. I have a question for you. Do you prefer alphas who are scary and brooding, or alphas who secretly just want to be patted? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for listening to Linas Romantasy Collection. I'll see you in the next story.